So I had asked a few days ago if anybody had any particular issues that they wanted talked about or discussed. So what we talked about yesterday was the word time, which was one request. The other request was discussing names. So I was thinking of writing down a number of the different names of Elohim that are in the scriptures here, and we can just look at them. Those don't have to take the whole time. Is that good? You guys want to talk about that? Okay, if there's any other subject that you want to look at or any other verse you want to look at, this is the chance. We don't want to miss this opportunity. So I'm trying to make sure that your concerns are addressed and the things that you find valuable are discussed, not just what I'm trying to think is valuable for myself. So, did you have anything in particular that you wanted to hear about? Okay, I've given you time now because after we're done with the names, then we can address it. So, not to distract you from paying attention, but well, anyway, I'm just saying if anybody has like for example, this one time a few years ago, this lady said, "Gosh, there's this one verse that's bugged me for years. For years, it's always just kind of nagging, gnawing on what is this?" So we just looked at it in the Paleo letters, and all of a sudden, this whole understanding came out of it. And again, there might be more to it, but at least it completely resolved this disturbance that she had felt for years. So this is just an other way of looking at trying to hide so I don't call on you? I'm going to call on you twice as often now just for that. Here, we'll start right off. Okay, Bill, what are the names of Elohim? What are the names of Elohim that we want to look at? Can you think of them off the top of your head? Okay, God, we're going to make a list here. Elohim. I couldn't hear. That's pretty much your list? Okay. Lord. Okay, does anybody else have anything else they want to throw in there? And there was one other, did you see? Emmanuel.
one that's always out of my box. It's got to pull it in. Why?
What do you mean?
I don't know what I mean. Kind of, that one always seems to me, just naturally, I guess that's where I come from with my baggage, always seems like out of place.
Okay, so then we'll look at that one. Well, we'll look at all of them, but we'll look at that one with a particular regard. Anything else?
Master.
Of course, if you start going to go on job descriptions, then you've got Savior, Redeemer, Redeemer. Then you've got like, there's a whole list of ones like Yahweh Rapha, Yahweh Nissi, right? So that's healer. Healer is actually the word in Hebrew for Rapha. And Nissi is the word for banner. And there's a number of other ones. And then you could make a whole nother list like, word, bread of life. So I was, back in the 70s, remember a poster somebody made, and it was, a lot of colors and all, but all these names are in the background, and then just I am right across the middle in white. So there could be more probably added. We've asked, sometimes just for the sake of conversation, I think I mentioned before, you're sitting you go to a cafe, a restaurant or something, and you're talking, and all of a sudden, somebody just steps right into your world. You go, well, of course they want to ask you what you want to eat, it's the waiter, but for them to intrude right into your space, seems like, well, you have the right to ask them something. So just a few times I've said, hey, we're right in the middle of a conversation, this is what we're pondering, let me ask you the question. What is truth? Just pull them into your conversation. A good waiter is going to sit there and probably engage you, but what I'm saying is that's a perfect opportunity to conduct this completely random man-on-the-street interview to get a different point of view about any subject you might happen to be pondering or discussing with somebody else. And it's not like you barge into somebody else's life. Of course, there's some people on the internet where you'll see they'll go around with a microphone and ask people, right? But when somebody just imposes in the middle of your mind space, engage them. Just ask them some question. And you'll probably get at least a few seconds worth of attention out of a waiter, but it's just kind of a little thing to do. And you never know that they might never have somebody ask them a question like that. They might never go to church, might never crack a book open to, and a lot of people, I mean, I've been told, you ask certain thoughts that they've never thought before. They've never considered. They've never engaged in a conversation. And even if you're just this, they think of you as like, boy, this is this kind of a strange person who's thinking these thoughts. It's like, so what? Like I said, they're imposing into your space. So that's just to say, just for fun, go ahead and do that. But anyway, in terms of talking about his name, I've heard the response from Christians, oh, he's got many names. So the name is not an issue. So here, there's this list and more, and I'll briefly address each one of these. We can elaborate on some other ones if you want. But if we can think of a particular Bible verse, if he's going to talk, let's talk about identity. Let's suggest there's let's suggest there's 5 ways that the one we regard in worship identified himself. Can you think of the top 5 ways by which he identified himself? Well, those are names, but let me put it this way. One of the ways he identified himself was his name. Okay? So I'm just telling you my track of thinking. So he gave us, when he was asked in Exodus 3, Moses asked the question very specifically. He said, when the leaders of Israel that I go back and talk to ask me, what is the name of this deity that you've been communicating with? What shall I tell them? I mean, Exodus 3, very specifically, he identifies himself by his name. That's the burning bush incident. Okay, now, how else did he identify himself? When he said Son of Man, what is that in context of? Is that a job description? Is that a title? Some kind of a role? Which is to say, if you were on a construction site and you're going to say, okay, who do we got with us here? You're going to go by job description. And maybe they'll wear a different uniform or have a responsibility position. So, for example, you've got the architect planning the white-collar jobs, then you've got the blue-collar jobs of the excavation group, then you've got the concrete group, and then you've got the framers, plumbers, electricians, infrastructure, then you've got ultimately finish guys. Once the roof's on, then you can throw on paint, wallpaper, top, right? So there's these different job categories. A bunch of these are job categories. The guy who's running the show, the boss, the name of the company, that's kind of like title. So what I'm saying is that if we were going to break up ways of his identity, if somebody says, for example, let me just say this, and then this word Allah is mentioned. Well, that's the Islamic God. Is it the same as the one we refer to? Now, I've heard a bunch of people say it is, but if you're going to have 5 different qualifications besides just the phonetic similarity, because this word Elohi or Eloah, this is used in the book of Daniel. And just so you know, the book of Daniel is mostly Aramaic. It's written what looks like Hebrew letters because Aramaic uses the same as English letters. For example, if you are reading a book in Spanish, they use the same English type letters that we're familiar with, but they spell words differently in Spanish, right? Some of the words might look the same. A bunch of them are different, but in Aramaic and Hebrew, a bunch of them are virtually identical, about a few little grammatical differences. So if you're looking at Hebrew and you read the book of Daniel, you might not even know that you're reading an Aramaic. There's a difference between Arabic, which is Arab, which is these guys. When I say these guys, that's more Islam, I think, and I don't know so much about them, but Aramaic, here, you've got Hebrew, which, this is just my understanding, so you understand. Hebrew is your 22 letters, and that's the ancient language. And then you've got Aram, Aic. So that's like up by Syria, right? Aram. It talks about people coming from that neighborhood. And then you've got Arab, and the Arab, like Saudi Arabia, that's a different language. And they, like when you see in the Islamic flag, and they just have these weird lines, and that's the Arabic font. That's not Aramaic, from what I understand. But Aramaic is the one that uses. Andrew Gabriel Roth wrote a book called the AENT, Aramaic English New Testament. So there's no Old Testament. That comes from a book called the Peshitta. And apparently there was a couple different versions of the Peshitta, which he translated or borrowed somebody else's translation or messed around with it or whatever he did. We've got the whole New Testament. So it's from an Aramaic root as opposed to the Greek language root. So it reads, have you compared side by side with KJV or something? Well, so then the question would be, say, wait a minute. How in the world could the authorized Word of God, through the Greek that he arranged, I've heard it said that Greek was the authorized language, tongue of the world, because you have what you call local or colloquial, and which is to say a tribal tongue, but then you have a tongue of commerce, which they use for conducting between people groups, and Greek was the common tongue, or lingua franca, you might say, of the ancient world. So when Alexander the Great came in and made everything be a Greek tongue, that even if you spoke Hebrew or Aramaic, you'd do international trade or even intercity trade with Greek, and so things would be written in Greek. So even the Romans would use Greek, and so that's why they say the New Testament was written in Greek. But then all of a sudden you find this Peshitta. Like I said, there's at least two of them that I know about, and it reads like a different book. But Andrew Gabriel Roth says you can see in the text that there are certain things which are not Greek syntax, not Greek thoughts, not Greek phrasing, but they are Aramaic thoughts and phrasing, like a pun. Like, for example, there's a little joke that we learned when we were really small. What's black and white and red all over? Or a zebra that got hit by a car, or a skunk, or, you know. But the pun is, the word red is both a color and it means to read a newspaper. Well, if you tell that joke in French, no one's going to get it. It doesn't work, because the word red is not the same word. It just doesn't fit. That's the difference between the Aramaic Peshitta and the Greek New Testament. Certain things are a pun or a joke or a riddle or a rhyme in Aramaic, but absolutely not in Greek. So when they find that pun or riddle embedded in the text, then they know for a fact it was not originally in Greek. It was originally in Aramaic or Hebrew, and then the Greek gave a best chance word for word comparison, synonym, and dropped it in the text. Now, the ISR version, of which the Hallelujah Scriptures is a variation of the ISR, Institute of Scripture Research. Blue cover just says the Scripture is written in silver on the front. When that book first came out, I'm not sure if it's still in there, but in the prologue, in the very beginning, in the preface, he said there's over 89,000? 90,000? It's an astounding number. 90,000 various Greek manuscript fragments. No two match. Word for word, letter for letter. There's no consistency in any two Greek ancient manuscript texts. Okay, how did anybody know which one was the authorized text that was sanctioned by the Holy Spirit? But how can you prove that one you decided was the one that was? Now, it seems to me if the Holy Spirit's job was to validate the authorized manuscript, he could have seen out of 90,000 that two of them matched. Then we could say, well, look, you know, even if it's a small voice, it's democracy rules. Those two must be the authorized text. So the chances that out of 90,000, there's a bunch of them that were the same, it seems to me that the more difficult job for the Holy Spirit would be to see to it that no two matched, as if to invalidate the Greek text as being purely holy. Well, if the Greek text, if the Greek writing doesn't, you might say, pass the test of being the authorized version, that gives that much more credibility to the Aramaic. So Andrew Gabriel Roth's book, here I'll just write it here just so you know, is simply referred to as AENT, Aramaic English New Testament. He printed two copies. One has English on one side and a very strange looking Aramaic font on the other, which is virtually unintelligible as far as I can see. I mean, it's just not even worth my effort to try to decipher it. So I just say, okay, yeah, whatever. And you can read the English. But see, that's what most people do with this. This Hebrew text, when I first got this, didn't read a word of Hebrew. It's got Hebrew on one side, English on the other. I can't make sense of the Hebrew. I'll just believe in whatever they tell me. Well, I'm trying to show you that you can identify the shape of the Hebrew letters, and you can appropriate a value to the Hebrew letters. You could look in the dictionary, and you can start piecing it together for yourself. I could probably do that with the Aramaic, and it's just not worth my time. So then Andrew came up with another version of the same book where he uses Hebrew letters. And that one you can look at, and if you start to learn Hebrew, you go, oh, okay, well now I have the New Testament written in Hebrew. But just so you know, it's Aramaic written in Hebrew. It's not pure Hebrew. So there is a difference. I'm just trying to clarify some misunderstanding, or maybe you don't even never heard of it. There's this thing called Yiddish. That's kind of a slang jargon, and from my understanding, it's a European blend of Hebrew with German and some other stuff thrown in. Maybe a little Russian, maybe a little Polish, maybe a little, it's a stew, okay? So it's like English. English is more of a potpourri. Theirs is that more of a stew. It's like, same difference. Okay, anyway, there's this other language called Ladino, which is a blend of Spanish and Hebrew. Now, has anybody ever heard of a place that doesn't exist anymore called Iberia? Or the Iberian Peninsula? Where is it? Why was it called Iberia? Do you have any idea? Well, so what? Why should the Hebrews call it Iberia? What does that got to do with anything? Oh, you're right. I hadn't noticed that before. It does sound like Siberia. And there's this phantom. Some astronomers swear it's not there. Other people swear it is there. Other people swear at people for even talking about it. But there's this planet called Nibiru. What does Nibiru have to do with Siberia or Iberia? What does that got to do with the Jews moving there and living there? Anybody got a... Abraham's granddaddy, or great-granddaddy, I'm not sure the generation, his name was Eber. Abraham, because he crossed over, was known as Hebrew. Eber is Hebrew, which in letters is Ayin Bet Resh. Now, the letter Ayin, I think we might have gone through it, it's normally pronounced as an A, or an O, or a U, and here it's pronounced as an E, and it's got this GH sort of a light guttural sound. The Ayin can be pronounced as any of these different vowels. So, Eber is the word Hebrew, and this is Iberia. It's the land of the Hebrews. So if you look at a map of the world, you have Haaretz, the land, Israel, over here on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea. And remember, David was a very good friend of a guy named Hiram, who was the Phoenician master. They weren't called Phoenicians yet. Tyre and Sidon were the two principal cities, and they had these huge cedar trees of Lebanon, and they would make ships. Now a guy named Stephen Collins out of South Dakota has written a book, 5 volumes actually. The first one was called The Lost Tribes of Israel Found. One of the volumes is about Carthage. And if you have an interest for history, what he says was, David was friends with Hiram, and they collaborated with defense and trading and shipping and communication of words. As a matter of fact, another principal city of Phoenicia was Byblos. And that word biblos, B-Y-B-L-O-S, is where we came up with the word Bible. That's where books and writing started. The alphabet sequence was established by the Phoenician culture, specifically in Biblos, and even the Spanish word for book is biblia, a library, biblioteca, because in Spain, these guys settled in Spain. Well, so they had these giant ships that were designed for ocean-going voyages, not just from Greece to Egypt, north and south, but from Israel all the way over to the west side of the Mediterranean Sea, which would have been Spain, Straits of Gibraltar, where you've got France and Spain and Africa, and then around the edge up to England. So these ships were going all over the place transporting. Well, what happened historically briefly is that when the nation was split apart, see, David handed the kingdom to Solomon. Solomon handed it to Rehoboam, his son. Rehoboam kicked the taxes up, so there was a revolt, a rebellion, where Yahweh had given the northern kingdom to Jeroboam. And so now you have the 10 tribes to the north and the 2 tribes to the south. That became the divided kingdom. Well, the northern kingdom, because of the pagan influence, idolatry, Jeroboam set up these idols at Dan and Bethel. So the people of Phoenicia weren't so interested necessarily in the God, the Elohim of Israel. So neither was Egypt, though they were in confederation with Solomon. So what you have is Judah became isolated, and the northern kingdom of Israel was still in commercial confederation with essentially Lebanon, which is Phoenicia, and Egypt. So they kept the trading empire going, and so they were still doing all the shipping and commerce, getting wealthier, and Judah was isolated religiously and politically and militarily. And then there was this big civil war forming a power vacuum when Judah and Israel wiped out a lot of each other's soldiers. So then Assyria, which had been up in the northeast corner, who had been just foaming at the mouth and drooling, waiting for a chance to just, because David had smacked them down pretty hard, right? And Yahweh called them in, and they just pounced on the northern kingdom and took it into captivity, 721 BC, which is basically 150 years later after Solomon or so. But what happened was, these guys, the Israelites, a bunch of them weren't taken to captivity or killed. They jumped, and they landed in Iberia, Spain, which is one of their ports of trading. They were already settled Iberia, and they also went to Carthage, which in Hebrew is Kirith Hadesh, like moon, month, it means new. So this is the new city on the North African coast up there by Libya, Carthage. Well, Carthage was the city that contended with Rome. There was 3 Punic wars. And finally, the third one, Carthage was torn apart. Carthage, remember, had Hannibal, who had all those elephants and stuff, and they put them on ships. And they went north, and they attacked Rome by coming through the Alps, coming back. Well, these ships were huge, these big 3-deck trireme ships with hundreds of guys at the oars. This is all Israelite, Lebanese, otherwise known as Phoenicians. It's the Greeks who named the Phoenicians. They didn't call themselves Phoenicians. They called themselves Israel, men of the covenant. This is all Israel that did this. Well, Stephen Collins traced all this stuff down, and there's a few other people who have written books too. But my point is, we in history have lost track of what happened to the ancient nation. What happened when David gave it to Solomon, gave it to Rehoboam, and the thing kind of disintegrated. It didn't disintegrate, it was the major world power, shipping, commerce, military, culture. It changed its names. Iberia was settled by Israel. The word Brazil, B-R-Z-L, those are 4 Hebrew letters, which means iron. And apparently iron is the principal export product of Brazil, even today. It was settled by Israelites conducting outposts of mining and shipping. All around the world you'll find this. Even the word Hawaii that island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, is Hebrew, Yod He Vav He, Yahweh, if you read it backwards, which would be the Hebraic way. Who named that? The word for their kahuna, the priest, is the same word as Kohen, which is the priest in Hebrew. When they say aloha, that's the same word of aloha, which is to say our Elohim. Let's greet each other in the name of our Elohim. But instead of mentioning his name, they just say Elohim or God. I mean, meet somebody, God. No, we might say, when we leave, God be with you. God be with you is where we come up with, here. God be with you ends up being good be why. Of course, it wasn't you, it was ye. God be with ye, which is where we come up with goodbye. So for them to just simply say aloha is the same as almost saying God be with you. So I'm just trying to show you how words evolved, morphed, permutated across the world, and it all goes back to Hebrew. Yes?
Where did it happen when Spain kicked the Jews out of it?
When what?
When the Spanish kicked the Jews out.
Those are in the days of Columbus. Interestingly enough, though it was ruled by Hebrews, Yahweh said, when the time comes that the balancing of scales is due, then all the evil you guys have done will come upon you. And you read back in Leviticus 26, but also chapter 28 of Deuteronomy. Both places, Yahweh says, he starts off saying, if you keep my instructions, this is what will happen. There's about 15 verses, not very many, but he says, this is what your life will look like. And if you look real close, it's a simple agrarian life. The weather will cooperate, your animals and your women will bear offspring, the water will be clean, the air pure, you'll work, and you'll rest, and you'll have a nice life. No whistles and bells, and you can say, well, gee, that's almost kind of boring. Oh, but if you want some interest and some activity, there's another 150 verses, or whatever it is, a big long list of all the horrible, terrible atrocities that are going to happen if you choose not to keep the covenant. And one of them is, in Leviticus 26 in particular, well, a bunch of them say this, but in general, you will flee though no one pursues you. And if you think, hey, wait a minute, what am I running for? No one's going to pursue you, then Yahweh will make sure they're following you. They'll follow you with the sword, with pestilence, which is plague, whether it's microorganisms or wild animals or the weather itself or earthquakes, and he will make you run and run and run, and every time you find a place to settle and go, whew, can we catch our breath now? Whoa, somebody else is after you. So even the Native American Indians that finally trenched in North America and says, okay, I think we're safe here, being of Israelite descent, not so fast. Not only did he turn them on each other, tribe against tribe, but then he says, you think you got a civilization stabilized? And he calls in Columbus, which brought the European hordes to just slaughter and slaughter and slaughter, pushing them to the brink of extinction. Just like he said in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. The history of the world. And then if the Europeans thought, we sure told those indigenous natives, oh no, because they're of the offspring of Israel too. So then he has them infight with world wars, and every time somebody thinks they're going to get settled, like especially around Eastern Europe, between Romania and Poland and Czechoslovakia, just time after time, wave after wave. And if they're not doing it to each other, he calls in the Orientals, so you get the Huns. Oh, just wave after wave of slaughter. And then you go back and you read Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, and then you read Deuteronomy 30, and it starts right off at the top. In fact, we're getting to his name because all this stuff plays into it, so we'll get to that in a moment. But I'm trying to address a few things. Anyway, has anybody not read Deuteronomy 30 lately? You want to read it? It's not a big, long chapter, but I think, personally, that Deuteronomy 30 is the chapter for us, right now, our generation, our day, you and me, anybody listening to this tape, I think Deuteronomy 30, it caught my attention as just being kind of one of the it chapters. And especially if you ponder the first verse. Now, one very interesting thing that I hope everybody has taken away from this week is that many people don't know how to study the Bible. Many people don't know how to study at all. When I was in high school, I got pretty good grades, and I tutored people in math and some other things, but the point is, some people have no idea how to study. And even if you try to hold their hand and walk them through, they can't. And I'm not saying they're stupid. What I'm saying that they were either never taught or their brain just doesn't go there. And it's not to put them down, they just don't. And just like you have different people on a construction site, don't expect the roofer to do the electrician's job or the painter to do the excavator's job, because they have skills, and that doesn't mean that if somebody can't study or if they have a dyslexic bouncing back and forth of the words that they're impaired or something's wrong with them. That's not so. So this very meeting of study the calendar, study the alphabet, it's not for everybody, and that's not to put anybody down or to put them to shame or degradation at all. But for the people that would like to, Charlene has done a masterful job of putting these things together and saying, here, this is the systemic approach to investigating a subject step by step. And if you look what Tim has done here, saying logically, rationally, you could say, look, man, cut to the chase. You got to have 5 times 30, it's 150, done. Why do we have to hear an hour of this is what works, this is what doesn't work, fitting this calendar and it doesn't fit, blah, blah, blah. Don't even waste your time. No! He's showing you how to study. And the way you study is to try to take what you think works or what somebody else thinks works and plug it in. And he is showing you the heavy burden, the yoke of labor on the investigator. And when you come to church and just hear bloop, 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 the pastor has put in years of strenuous effort, and you're just getting the cream off the top. But what Tim is showing you, even though it seems like, come on, just cut to the chase. No, this wasn't about cutting to the chase. This week was intended to be, let's show you how it's done. And if you go, oh man, I can't deal with all this. Well, you don't have to. But he's showing you, and like he said, what he took in an hour, he says, I could show you many, 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 many more. And I think Charlene said she spent 200 hours putting together an hour and a half of one talk. I mean, this represents probably thousands of hours. And we got to take it in 1 week. But somebody else says, okay, just what was it about? Now you're going to take a week and reduce it down into about 5 minutes. And maybe that's the takeaway. So what I'm saying is that you don't have to do this. But if he feels the burden, the compulsion, the calling to do it, great. But nobody else necessarily should feel that now we have to take the same burden. No. You don't have to unless the Ruach or something is driving you. I particularly felt that pull, the drive, the interest, and I also put the monkey on my own back to do this. But I'm not suggesting that any of you have to do it. I'm trying to give you a value. I'm trying to show you, for example, I took an art history class. Now before that, you look at a painting in a museum, I like that, I don't like that, yeah, whatever, this is interesting, oh, that's kind of boring, blah, 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 blah. Very surface, very Peshat level, right? What's the subject matter? Elephants? Who cares? Oh, cowboys and Indians, that's interesting. Oh, okay. It's like, no, wait a minute. The art history class said, let me show you what the artist did. And he shows you that he copied this one famous painting, though it doesn't make any sense. One reason that it's famous, that he borrowed from 10 other previously historical paintings and incorporated elements into this and making it modern for that culture. And now we look back and then you realize, gee, more modern album covers have taken that image and recreated it another 10 times. And then other people have used that image in advertisements. And all of a sudden you see that, man, the fabric of artistic communication goes all the way back to the days of the Greeks and the Romans and pulls it all the way up into modern advertising and record covers, and you would never have known. But the professor, with their study, is doing all the investigation work and pulling it together, and I suddenly got an appreciation that I didn't have before. And ever since, I've been able to look at a painting and see it with different eyes. Took a music history appreciation, the history of jazz, and so they were doing the same thing with music. And what I'm saying, I'm trying to do that with the letters, to show you something that you may not ever pick up and run with, which is okay. Tim and Charlene were doing the same thing. So, because that's a how do you study, how do you investigate, I'm going to show you one thing. You could do it with the whole chapter, but I'm just going to show you right off the top, first verse. What do you make of this sentence? Now this is, remember, there's only a chapter or two left of Deuteronomy, and then Moses dies. Moses is dead. Right after this is like Moses' last speech. He's 120 years old. This guy has gone up to Mount Sinai 10 times. This guy was trained in the courts, in the educational system of Pharaoh. He was an Egyptian general, successful. He then had this burden to the point that he murdered a man. He was then thrown out and banished, dragging himself through the desert almost dead. He becomes a shepherd. He hangs out with Jethro, who was a prince and a priest of Midian. So here it is Moshe, who's an exile from the side of Isaac, meeting up with one of the principal men of the side of Ishmael, the two houses of Abraham. This is a whole different world, and he marries basically like the king's daughter. I mean, suddenly thrown into this whole other position of prestige, and he's probably hanging out with other lesser princes of Midian, talking to him for the next 40 years. And then thrown into, Yahweh himself calls him. I mean, this is a big guy, but the humblest of all men, they say. It's like his last words we might do well to heed. And not just here, but what is he talking about? So when it says, it shall be, okay, that's future. That when all these things have come upon you, the blessing and the curse that I have presented before you. What's the blessing and the curse? He says, you do what Yahweh said, you get blessed. You don't do what Yahweh said. If you betray these lines of text in the covenant agreement, then you get cursed. And what's the curse? And what's the blessing? This is Deuteronomy 30. As I said, back up to Deuteronomy 28, which we're not going to do, and that's the list of the blessings and the cursings. It's specifically what he's referencing to, which is identical to, but rephrased, with Leviticus 26, which is the premier chapter in the Bible of clearly listing, this is the blessing, this is the curse. 15 verses, 150 verses, basically. That's what he's referring to, which means what he's talking about has to stretch throughout time. And I just gave you a brief history of the world, a brief history of Israel, from the days of Moses, jumping to David, and then the dispersion, bringing us here where we're scattered across the face of the earth, such that the indigenous peoples don't even remember where they came from. They're scattered all through North and South America, all through Europe, into Siberia, all through the Orient. So he's talking to us. He's talking to you and me. And remember, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, the communication was very lax. They didn't have the understanding of either communication or the internet or the information age that we're now in, so we have a different regard of this verse than they ever did in the past. This is talking to us. And we can see and map and trace, like this Celtic knot that Roy makes. I don't know, did anybody not hear the connection between Celtic and the Galut? You didn't? Okay, so the Celts are more than just an American basketball team, otherwise known as Celtics. Anyway, here, the word Celt, C-E-L-T. What does that mean and who were they? Briefly, nobody knows where they came from, but they took on because of the areas that they pushed into, they had a commonality of culture, but they took on local custom culture where it varied. But one common thing, they had this little matter called the Celtic knot, which Rory can draw pretty well. But he's just got this knack and he has this interest, and that's kind of one of his artistic flares. So, what's the Celtic knot? But who are the Celts? So you can buy books in the store and you can see they've dug up graves and they found buried wagons. They didn't have chariots, they used wagons, but they have certain types of clothing, certain types of armor, and they can tell by dating this evolution and the progression of ornaments and armaments, weapons and designs of jewelry, and clothing styles and technology development. Well, the same Celtic culture is found pushing up into, I guess it's kind of like Ukraine, and then pushing across Europe, and then it varied and became more refined as it pushed into a place called Gaul, G-A-U-L, which became known as France, but also the word Galatian, which is up near Turkey. See, Gaul is the same word. Asian is kind of an English suffix. It's the same exact thing that pushed up into England and then got more refined and became kind of like the specific indicator of Irish, which then was also shared with the Scottish ancient culture. But it's all the same, and then you'll see it in the Vikings also, who not only swept down into the British Isles, but they also went across the sea, Greenland, Canada, and so it's the same cultural, the same pieces of information found in relics are common to all these groups. But who were they and where did they come from? Huh? Well, what does Jews have to do with Celtic culture? And because the epitome of Celtic consciousness, you might say, is that knot, that Celtic knot, which is also used with people who are into medieval things and sword and sorcery, witchcraft. It's associated with some of that. What has that got to do with the Jews?
Well, they were into sorcery.
Well, they were, but specifically, what do you think the Celts have to do with the Jews? Migrations. Okay, here's the thing. In Hebrew, there's a word when Yahweh says, okay, if you guys profane the covenant and get cursed and get kicked out of the land, there's a word used for the exiles. It's G-L, Gimel Lamed. It's where you get this picture of the yin-yang. It's a revolving door. It's what comes around, goes around. It's because of what you did, you're going to get what you get. It's this revolving wheel. It's a rolling rock. That's G-L, Gimel Lamed. And remember the word, or the letter spelled Gimel is this boomerang, like a camel's head and neck, which is you throw it out and it comes back. They were known as the Gimel Lamed Gal. And to pluralize it, they're known as Galut. And there's a certain fellow who's a Jew named Mel Blanc who did a bunch of voices for Hollywood cartoons. And one of them, I believe, was Yosemite Sam in a Bugs Bunny cartoon. And because he pulled in his own self doing the voices and did some ad-lib stuff, and when he was going to insult somebody, he says, "You big galoot." You ever heard that phrase, "you big galoot," which is some big, some not very intelligent kind of oaf, kind of a, that's the word, galoot. Now, why would he call him a galoot? Because in Hebrew, the galoot were those idiots who profaned the covenant, betrayed it with treachery, those are two words Yahweh uses, and got kicked out of the land. And where did they go? The northern kingdom, Ephraim, got taken up into the Caucasus Mountains area. In that, they got taken into Assyria, and when Assyria got whooped by Babylon, a bunch of them sprung, or when maybe Persia took over also, a bunch of them went north through the Caucasus Mountains and became known as Caucasians. They went through the Caucasus Mountains and spread through northern Europe and became known as the various barbarian tribes who then attacked Rome and then went into the areas settled by the Gauls, which became This word Celt, the C is the third letter. The G phonetic of Gimel is the third letter in Hebrew. Celt, Galut. It's the same word. The Celts came from the Galut of Israel and got kicked out of the land. And what did he say? When all these things have come upon you, that's where we are now, the blessing and the curse I presented before you, Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26, then, oh, hey, that's right now. That's us now. Then you will take it to your heart. The fact that we're at this Moed and keeping this day of Yom HaShabbat is proof that we are taking these matters to heart. So we can say this chapter is about you and me right now. What does he go on to say? Among all the nations where Yahweh your Elohim has dispersed you. Okay, we are sitting here in Canada in the midst of the various people groups scattered all across the face of the earth that he has done this to us. And here we are as proof that these verses are true and that we are the remnants of the Galut scattered even here. And you will teshuva, return not to the Christian faith or rabbinical Judaism or to Mohammedan Islam, but you will return to Yahweh your Elohim. He gives a name, Yahuwah your Elohim. The word your Elohim is Eloah with a kaf at the end, so it's ka, so it's Eloheka. So Eloheka is your Elohim. And Shema, his call. Listen to his voice. That's what we've been doing all this week, trying to listen to his voice. Now this is a very specific way of listening to his voice. According to everything I command you today. Wait a minute. This doesn't mean going back to the Westminster Confession of Faith, or this doesn't mean going back to the Vatican II Council. This doesn't mean going back to a bunch of rules and regulations of the Talmud. This means going back to this chapter of Deuteronomy 30. You and your children, that's not only the people there, but that's us, and that's our offspring of children. With all your heart and all your soul. You know that movie? The music, the song, dun, 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 da, 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 da. That's heart and soul, right? You can go on and read through the rest of the chapter how many times this phrase heart and soul is mentioned. This is where it comes from. Return to hear the voice of Yahweh according to everything that Moshe commands them this day in Deuteronomy 30 with all your heart and with all your soul. See, now that goes back to the mem. The words that he spoke as the instructions, that's the letters Kaf and Lamed according to the pattern, and mem is your heart, your soul, nurturing, fostering, incubating those words within you, and that's going to have a direct impact on what happens next. Then, based on what we do right now, Yahweh your Elohim, there's his name, will bring back, that word is teshuva, or it's a variation of the word shuv, will bring back your captivity and have mercy on you, two different things, and he will gather you in from all the peoples to which Yahweh your Elohim has scattered you. Three different things he'll do, and it's all a boomerang. It's all a revolving door. Yin yang, the rolling stone that gathers no moss, that's Israel. Israel is this stone that has to keep running and fleeing and rolling here to there, never settling. And if they do settle, Yahweh will whip up the environment, or he'll whip up the plague and pestilence, or he'll whip up the enemies. And so this Celtic knot, the interesting thing about it, is that it's this intricate pattern weaving around in and through itself, but there's no beginning and there's no end. As if the people of the Celtic knot design don't remember where they came from, or where they're going, or why they were put on this maze of a path where, can we stop? No, just keep moving. Well, we were here before. I'm back on the same thread. Doesn't matter, keep moving. In fact, there is a plant called the wandering Jew. And the reason they call it that is because the thing just keeps going. And every time it sprouts down, it goes again. Similar to a blackberry, a wild blackberry, thorned blackberry. Every time the thing touches down, poof, it puts out roots, but then it sprouts and puts down more roots, and you can't pull it this way and figure you've got the root because it's just, gosh, that's a picture of Israel. The wandering Jew, that's the connection between the Celts and the Jews. And the map of their curse is the Celtic knot. It's a perfect map. It's a road map. No beginning, no end. Yahweh says in other places, you will forget that you were ever my people. You will forget I was ever your Elohim. You will forget that your ancient ancestors ever regarded me, which is why the house of Israel got turned into the name Phoenician, which is PNC phonetics, like the word Punic, like the Carthage wars with Rome, which is where we get the word punk, PNK, which just some stupid, uneducated thug. Even the word thug, it kind of says what punk. That's one of the more insulting words. It's Israel. So what I'm saying is that it's validating this whole thing. But, excuse me, this is verse 3. I'm repeating it. 3 things Yahweh's going to do after this. Okay, so this hasn't happened yet. For me to say, hey, we might have 1,000 years in front of us, it changes your expectation. It changes your heart. It changes your thoughts, and it changes your behavior. If I really thought that the world was going to come to an end, why bother painting my house? Let the paint fall off. I don't care. Why waste my time? Oh, I just like foot painting. Okay. Oh, I just want to see the pretty color. That's okay. But if I knew the world was going to come to an end, or they were going to drop a bomb next week, do you think that the guy whose job it was to clean the windows of the World Trade Center, or even the building next to it, would have bothered going to work that day if he knew they were going to drop it? It's the same thing. If we see it coming, it will defeat our motivation. What do we see coming? If we saw coming this, it's going to change our motivation, our thoughts, our orientation. And remember we talked about the word for nose or character, steering. Rory was, you want to explain about riding a bike, motorcycle with your nose?
Oh, in a motorcycle, you look where you want to go. If you're turning, like in a car, you just turn the wheel and it goes. With a motorcycle, I want to turn left, I look over there. I look the direction I'm going. If you're ever driving down the road and you see something lying on the side of the road on a motorcycle, you don't look at it. If you look at it, the bike's going to go that way. Right? When you turn your head, your body tends to tilt that way. You tilt the bike, that's the way the front wheel goes.
So the nose is the rudder.
Yeah. The North American Indian, when white men first arrived, didn't go, oh, over there. They went, over there, with their nose. Not over there, over there. Because where your nose goes, your head goes. Where your head goes, the rest of you usually follows.
So the interesting thing...
That literally.
So the interesting thing about the word nose is the word, it's off, aleph pei, which would be the letters English consonants AF, after. You follow after, you're off. Just what he said. There's some gravel. If you look at it, you're going to slide into it and crash your bike. So the point is, if I tell you what to expect here, and you orient your being towards Yahweh's promises, you're going to live your life differently. You're just going to live differently. And then what he said is going to happen. And I could show you many verses that prove that out too. But here, again, repeat. Bring back your captivity, have mercy upon you, and gather you in from wherever he scattered you. Well, that's the same way we're supposed to treat each other. We're supposed to not only listen to his voice according to everything he said, but we're supposed to help each other come back from the captivity, which is a captivity of the mind and not just body, release the captives from the system, which the Babylonic system, and again that tower that we talked about, the towering head of gold, arms of silver, midsection bronze, the thoughts, the intelligentsia, the economics and military, the culture, the politics and religion of Rome. How do we release each other from that system? They're a very interesting thing. There was this Torah study years ago I was going to, and the kids all seemed to love this one game, freeze tag. You ever play that? Think about what's going on, because you remember what you teach your children is systems and rules. They think they're games. They're like I was noticing when your daughter was putting, the square peg in the square hole and the round peg in the round, learning shapes. And she was doing it pretty quickly. And when she was done, she smiled and said, hey, look I'm getting better at this. I'm getting faster. And so we're learning a system. We're learning the way things work. It's not just keep them busy. It's not about that. You're learning systems. You're learning patterns and models. So what are we teaching with freeze tag? One person's it. That's the devil. Everybody else is, woohoo, we're free to run and play, ha-ha, meh, to the devil, and if the devil can touch you, oh, I'm frozen. Got a bad knee. I'm in debt. I'm just depressed. There was a death in my family. I can't run and play anymore. And everybody else is, oh, here, if I can touch the person and set them free, but the devil, God, got you too. Oh, now there's two of them. And now the devil's going to use them as a trap. It's like, come on, see if you can get them. And if you can get close enough to touch them, then they're free. But if not, he can jump and grab you, and that's the game. That's a picture of this life. That's what we do. But the objective is the game of those who are still free and limber to run around is to touch those who have been, boom, frozen by the devil and let them go. What a wonderful game to teach. So Shabbat afternoons, it was a 10 or 12 hour long meeting, but at the Oneg break, the kids would go out and run around and play that. And it was like, whew, what a release. And you think, they're just kids playing kid game. They were probably subconsciously learning more than all the heavy words that were being said in the meeting, because that simple little thing is this. Yahweh's going to release us from the captivity of that statue of Daniel 2 to be able to live. And that release, that's shalom. The word shalom is literally nothing impairing mind, spirit, soul, nephesh, thoughts, body, agility, to get up and be able to dance with, I think I'll look stupid. No, there's a psychological impairment. Let that one go too. Yeah, but my burden of my finances. Hey, it's Shabbat. Don't even think about it. On Shabbat, this clock should be taken down, flipped around. It doesn't matter what time it is on Shabbat. Wake up when you wake up. Study until you get tired. Close your eyes and sleep if you want to. It doesn't matter, especially on Shabbat. Okay, then here, let's go on. Now he's going to qualify to the extreme to which he's going to make this happen. If you're dispersed, will be at the ends of heaven, where, or from there, Yahweh your Elohim will gather you, and from there he'll take you. Now, regardless of what anybody thinks about the NASA space program, whether that's legitimate or not, the way I read this is that if one of the guys on the International Space Station happens to be committed to Yahweh in a Hebrew, Yahweh's going to call back his mission and have them send up a special space shuttle, or somehow he's going to be yanked off that space station and brought back to this event. Just because he said so. Why else would he said to the ends of heaven? Yahweh your Elohim will bring you to the land. Okay, that's Israel, that your forefathers possessed, and you shall possess it. So if the state of Israel there now, if the government says, hey, if you're not one of the Ashkenazi Jews, if you're not of our political system, if you're not authorized by the Vatican or the Rothschilds or the New World Order or whoever else thinks they're running that place, this supersedes their authority. So something has to change in that government and cultural, political stranglehold that they've got going on right now. And if they are the people who will allow this, that's one thing. But if they say no way, then they got to get kicked out of the land just as well as the Canaanites got kicked out of the land for Yahweh to bring his people back the first time. So I'm not saying that there's anything kadosh or sacred about any particular government sitting in any particular seat of authority, whether it's economic, military, political, or judicial in the land. And if you do a little bit of research into who built that Supreme Court building over there, you'll know what I'm talking about. Yahweh your Elohim will bring you to the land. It's not a matter of them allowing anybody in. And he said he's going to recover all 12 tribes, not just one tribe who calls themselves Jews. That your forefathers possessed, and you shall possess it. Well, here, all of us sitting here today are not in the land possessing it. So this event hasn't happened yet. So this has to be in front of us. So either the Messiah is going to come back and he's going to take us there, or he's going to take us there and put us there before the Messiah comes back. Either way, one or the other, it hasn't happened. So I'm not saying that okay, Messiah's going to come back tomorrow and he'll take us there and that'll fulfill it. Maybe that'll happen, but maybe there's another scenario. I'm just bringing this to your attention. He, speaking of Yahweh, this is Moshe speaking, Yahweh will do good to you. This is a good thing. And make you more numerous than your forefathers. Well, either he's going to bring in a whole bunch of people or there's going to be a whole bunch of offspring, but that word is spelled with a resh bet, rab, which also means to increase the regard of your value, not necessarily only numbers. In other words, look at the book of Esther. Everybody hated the Jews and were going to kill them. There was a turn of events, and after 2 days, everybody suddenly wanted to become a Jew because the increase of their value became the alfun, the highest in the land, and everybody knew if they became one of them, they could absorb or be part of the blessing that was happening. It's a model of what he's talking about here. So somehow, do you think he's going to increase our regard, increase our numbers and say, okay, game's over, let's all go home, bring in eternity and that's the end of it? Or is he going to sustain this for a while? If he sustains it for a while, which is what other verses look like, that's why I'm saying, what if we have 1,000 years in front of us? What if the whole 7th millennium is in front of us? He's going to increase our value more than our forefathers, more than David, more than Solomon. That's a pretty big deal. They had an internationally affecting influence of thoughts, of arts, of military, of culture, of commerce, and even architecture. If you look at Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes, this is a really big deal. Yahweh your Elohim will circumcise your heart. That means remove the barrier, which is to say, yeah, but, no, he'll get rid of the yabbits. And the heart of your offspring. Oh, it's multi-generational. To love Yahweh, you or your Elohim, with all your heart and all your soul, that you may live. This isn't so that he can bring the world to an end. It's so that you may live. So here it is with all your heart and soul. And then, verse 7, Yahweh your Elohim will place all these imprecations. What imprecations? Upon your enemies. It's all the imprecations of Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26. Every single thing that he listed that he was going to do to Israel, if Israel betrayed the covenant, he then is going to turn and dump on the head of those who did it to us. This is an incredible verse, which is why our enemies do not want us to read or believe this verse or come back to these ways. Because Yahweh said it, Aleph, it will happen, Tav. And if you see how serious this is, read Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28 instead of thinking, oh, these horrible things that Yahweh did to us, oh, these are just too horrible, oh, we don't even want to think about this. No, that's a prophecy of what he's going to do to our enemies. And every person who stands in the way of letting Yahweh's people come back home to Israel is going to catch the curses of Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, which includes the government of Israel or the government of the US, the UK, the USSR, or the UN. Any one of those people, and then there's prophecies that says when they see the blessing upon his people, they will be quick to say, can I buy you a ticket, you and your family and your dog? Hey, forget the restrictions of no animals. Hey, I will pay the bill, because they know that they'll get whacked if they don't, and they will get blessed if they do, and they're smart enough to turn around, though the house of Israel doesn't seem to be smart enough to figure that out for the last 3,000 years. 3,500 years. This was 1500 BC when Moses said these words. And so what I'm trying to show you is that the way to read this text is not just reading it, but to stop and do what Charlene and Tim have showed us to do and consider every phrase, every word. What does this mean? Does it mean that? No. What would happen if it looked like that? But what would happen if it would look like this? Apply the method of their teaching to the analysis of these words. That's how you study. And if you never were taught how to study, because the school system now doesn't want you to study. In fact, I have a friend who was a teacher, and they were told a couple decades ago, do not teach the children how to think. Tell the children how to answer the questions with the answers we give them. That's it. They're trying to program the resiliency of our minds to even be able to analyze such things. Why? They don't want us to read this. Next verse. You shall return and listen. Let me back up again. The same verse. Yahweh your Elohim will place all these imprecations upon your enemies and those who hate you, who pursued you. Everyone who pursues you is painting a target on their own head, saying, I will like to catch the blessing, please. Every person who comes against you is painting a target on their own head for Yahweh to pay attention and spot them like a helicopter view, no matter where they run in the earth. You shall return, Teshuvah, and listen, Shema, to the voice, Hakol, of Yahweh, and perform, Oseh, Ashah, that's that word, Ayin Shin He, all his commandments, that's his Torot, his Chok, his instructions, that I command you this day, that's the word mitzvot, matzah, like house festival of unleavened bread to find out how to do something. Now I'm telling you words I think they are, I'd have to double check in the Hebrew to make sure, but I'm giving you synonyms of certainly what those words are. Yahweh will make you abundant in all your handiwork. This is not to bring you to an end. This is the beginning of prosperity. This will go on for generations. In the fruit of your womb, there's the generations, the fruit of your animals, there's abundant livestock, and the fruit of your land, there's agriculture blooming and blossoming without having trouble from the county or from the water table. For good, that's the word tov, which is a full basket of prosperity, when Yahweh will return to rejoice over you for good. Yahweh's looking forward to rejoicing. He's telling us to rejoice because when we rejoice, he can turn things around and then he will rejoice. He is looking forward to this event. He is anticipating the day when he gets to do this, just as much as when you were a kid, you might have rejoiced over the day forthcoming when it was summer vacation and you get to go to Disneyland, or you get to go to the ocean, or something that was a spectacular treat. Or if your parents said, when you get to be 16 years old, we'll give you the keys to the car. Woohoo, really? Hey, this is Yahweh looking more forward to that for himself. As he rejoiced. Now this is comparing what he rejoiced over your forefathers. That must mean he rejoiced over David. He rejoiced over Moses. He rejoiced over the day he made Adam and Hua before they disobeyed and ate the fruit. He rejoiced when he made the world and said, it's tov, it's good. He will rejoice over what he's going to do with us for our prestige and preeminence. When, okay, here's the qualifier. When we are determining the time clock, we are determining the schedule. When you listen, Shema, to the voice, Hakol, of Yahweh Elohim, to observe, Shamar, the commandments and decrees that are written in this book of the Torah, this book of instruction, the covenant of light expressed, revealed. When, again another qualifier, you shall return to Teshuvah, to Yahweh your Elohim, again, with all your heart and with all your soul. Now, take a pause for a minute. Now I'm going to show you something why, and then we'll get to these names because we only got 10 minutes left. Why is it that the Pope says, I get to declare the calendar? Why is it that the rabbis determine when does a month start? And we look at them and say, "Wah! Did God give you the authority? Why do you take it out of his hands?" This is where they get it. So listen carefully. I'm not going to belabor this, but I'm going to show you why they feel justified and that they actually feel like they're doing what they were told to do. So we cannot put them down. We can disagree, but we cannot scorn them, mock them, deride them, disparage them. That's not appropriate, and this is where they get it from. I'll explain it. See, this is verse 15. See, I have placed before you today the life and the good, and the death and the evil. I put before you life and death. that which I command you today, to love Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in his ways, to observe his commandments, his decrees, and his ordinances, then you will live. Okay, this is how you live. Do what he said. And you will multiply, and Yahweh your Elohim will bless you in the land to which you come to possess it. But if, excuse me, I jumped. Let me finish reading this. But if your heart will stray and will not listen, and you are led astray, that's with bad teachers, and you prostrate yourself to the gods of others to serve them, that's the word Elohim Achrim, I tell you today that you will surely be lost. There's the Celtic knot. You will not lengthen your days, the land that you cross the Jordan to come to possess it. I call heaven and earth today to bear witness against you. I've placed life and death before you, blessing and the curse. Then you will choose life. Remember, this is the darkness outside the fence. Put before you life and death, choose life. You don't know the instructions. You don't know anything he said. All you know, Yeshua was lifted up. That's Nun Samik. Yeshua is lifted up. The Nun, the living one, on the cross, or the stake, the Samik, lifted up to draw attention so we could choose life, enter in, then we learn the instructions. Choose life so that you will live, you and your offspring, to love Yahweh Elohim, to listen to his voice, cling to him, for he is your life and the length of your days, to dwell upon the land that Yahweh swore to your forefathers, to Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, to give them. The thing I missed, sorry, my eyes jumped over it. This is what I was trying to read to you. For this commandment I command you today, it is not hidden. Now that word can also be translated as too difficult.
What verse is that?
Verse 11. It's not too difficult or hidden from you, and it is not distant. It is, here's the phrase, it is not in heaven to say, who can ascend to heaven for us and take it for us so that we can listen to it and perform it? That phrase, it is not in heaven, is lo, bashamayim, he. The word lo means not, bashamayim, in the heavens, he, it is. It is not in the heavens. Nor is it across the sea for you to say, who can cross to the other side of the sea for us and take it for us so we can listen to it and perform it. That's to say, it's not written in another language. It's not in the heavens for God to declare. It's not in a foreign language for somebody else to hold and command. Here's the crux of the matter. It is very near to you in your mouth and in your heart to perform it. The rabbis take this, lo bashamayim he, and say, he put it in our mouth and told us to declare how it should be performed. So when the rabbis say, it's not Passover until we say it's Passover, this is their authority. When the Pope says, I am going to command the calendar, he is not usurping power, he is exercising responsibility. When they read this, they read that the Creator told them, don't say it, I got nothing to do with it. I created the world and I put it in your mouth. You speak. And so the Pope sits there and says, okay, then I shall declare the matter, and so it shall be. And the rabbis say, if we fail to keep this responsibility, we have failed him. We have no right to push it off on him and say, well, we can't figure out the calendar. Woo-hoo. Oh, it's written in a foreign language. We don't speak that language. Oh, it's not my fault. Because he said, I've put it in your mouth. You're the rabbi. You speak, and so it is. And so they have a saying, a little parable. This little parable says, there's a group of rabbis. I'm going to paraphrase it. There's a group of rabbis. Their voice rules. And they make a decision about what the calendar is or something like that. And a prophet comes, the prophet like Moses. I disagree with you rabbis. Sorry, he gave it to our voice, not yours. Well, if I'm right, let that tree in the field jump up and rip itself out of the roots and turn upside down and fly away. And it does so. And these rabbis say, we were not told to listen to a tree. He put it in our voice. The prophet says, if my voice is God's voice, let that river turn backwards and flow the other direction. And it does so. And they say, we were not told to listen to a river. He gave the responsibility in our voice. And he says, if I'm right and God speaks for me, let the voice of Elohim himself speak and command you and tell you. And the voice comes, listen to the prophet. He told us the voice is not in the heavens, but it's in our voice to declare matter and perform it. So the prophet goes away in shame. That's their saying, and they take it with austere responsibility. Now, just because we disagree doesn't make us right and them wrong, but I'm trying to show you the cultural difference between what they believe with all their heart and the exercise of responsibility that I have to project and assume that even the Pope feels with due diligence. So if the rabbis make a declaration or the Pope makes a ruling and I decide, no, I don't buy it. I am the rebel. I am the outcast. But then for me to say, I don't think those verses are translated to mean that, means I have removed myself from the covering of the rabbinical authority. And from my understanding, the reason the Jews wear the yarmulke, the kippah, is because it's a symbol of their subservience to the rabbinical authority. When you put on a kippah to walk into a sanctuary or to go to the Wailing Wall and step in, you have to put a kippah on. I'm not a Jew. No, it has nothing to do with that. You are yielding your autonomy to be subservient volitionally to the rabbinical authority by saying, I'm not here to cause trouble. The rabbis own this place. The rabbis make the decrees. What are the rules? Women over there, men here. It's a dividing wall. Okay, if I want to go to the Wailing Wall, because that's their dominion, their principality, you put the kippah on and you walk up and you can be there. But if you like pick your nose and wipe it on the wall, they have the authority to throw you out. This is not about us profaning their turf. If we do that, we're very wrong. And that their turf is not only their land that they have the jurisdiction over right now until the day that Yahweh brings it back and gives it to the 12 tribes, but it's intellectual dominion over their turf, which is their translations. I can say I don't agree or trust with the English definitions that they have put in this book, but they have no responsibility to cater to me. They're not speaking to Protestants. They're not speaking to Catholics or Buddhists. They are telling their people what they have decided is a good enough translation. I have no right or business saying they're wrong. I don't say that. What I'm saying is I personally have put the monkey on my own back, which is not a little chimp, but a gorilla, to figure out what these words mean for my own conduct of behavior. And if anybody else wants to listen to me, well, thank you very much, but you don't even have to listen to me. My wife doesn't even have to listen to me.
And that's now on tape.
But I'm saying we each are responsible for ourselves. If she chooses to listen to me, but she has her own thoughts about different matters, she doesn't study the way I do, but I don't study the way she does. We might come to an agreement on some things, but I don't dominate and rule and tell her, do this, don't do that. I don't consider that to be my place. I don't have shackles on her brain or her heart. That's not my position in life. If I assume to be some kind of teacher or authority, some rabbi, some priest, which I don't, then I'd have to try to describe that job description and then fit into those shoes and then start acting like it, telling you, believe this, do that, don't behave. Whew, that's not what this is about. I'm trying to show you that if you want to go to church, sit in church and do what they say. They have the preacher up front to filter doctrines and give you words. They have deacons at the back to keep the ruffians out so that you can sit in peace and safety. Sleep if you want, listen, sing if you want. But when you go to church, you're under their principality. Yahweh established protocols of government and culture. And when somebody rules a land, like when the indigenous natives, call them, or exiles came and settled here, there are certain jurisdictions of principality, even if you don't agree, even if they're wrong. If this is somebody else's turf, somebody else's house, and they make a rule, we have to go by it unless we can legally exercise a negotiation to get out from under. But if they say, for example, no alcohol, shut up, we can do whatever we want. I'm going to drink something. I've now just busted their authority, and I'm guilty. Even if I feel the liberty, because I've now determined scales of mishpat, of betrayal. And Yahweh can then bring betrayal upon me in some other area. The whole thing about mishpat is when you make a deal, you live up to that deal. And the way that you determine exercising your deal is going to be manifested to the extreme on the international or the bigger level. And he's telling us this is the way it works. Honor, principality, protocol is the way things work at this level of government. Now, every one of these words speaks about these matters. We can give them any name, but it's not about the name. It's about what it means. What do we have, 2 minutes left? 5 minutes, okay. Let me go through this real quick. The reason why I brought this thing about name means, in the dictionary, not just the sound of it, but fame, which is what are you known for, renown, which is what are you known for, reputation, which is what are you known for, occupation of all your concerns. Okay, what I know about Rory has to do with building inspection, which means he knows about construction, he likes to ride a bike, draws Celtic knots. Okay, those three things that I can plug in, that's his Shem. Besides his name. That's his Shem. It's the stuff that he's about. Okay, cut to the chase. The entire alphabet and everything it mentions is what Yahweh is about. From Aleph to Tav. And including this mysterious notion, Aleph Tav, which is beginning and end. One of the things we mentioned down here. Ha-Shem literally means the name. This word Shem is name. But it's not just name. It's fame, renown, reputation, and the occupation of all your personal concerns. That's the meaning in the dictionary. It also means there. It's also sometimes translated as here. It's where you're at. Where you're at. Oh, I like bikes and Celtic knots and building construction. Okay, that's your Shem. That's where you're at. So the reason why the word Shem means there, if you say, okay, I've put this book there. That's the book's Shem. That's where it is. So Shem is a location. Okay, every one of these different words is something about where he's at, what he does. We could identify each one, but we don't have the time. Let me then cut to this one other fundamental thing to show you. If you know the meanings of the letters, which we tried to spend all week going through, you yourself can contemplate every one of these words. And for the sake of doing so, you will be in the act of teshuvah, returning to the matters that he declared this day. Because this alphabet, right, the whole alphabet is the matters. So when you write Elyon, Most High, you can look at the meanings of the letters, and you can look at the dictionary, and you'll know exactly what it means. When you write El Shaddai, you can look in the dictionary, and you can know that this is a suffix, and you can look at what this means, and you'll know exactly what it means. If you write the word Ehyeh, I am, and realize in Exodus 3, he says, tell them Ehyeh sent you. But furthermore, he said his name was Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. This is kind of like I described the other day, a dot, a straight line, and a dot, which is a graphic interpretation of what those words mean. The word Asher means a straight line. So I'm putting into a geometrical image what those words mean. And then if you look at Yahweh, which is what he said in Exodus 3, you look in the dictionary, and this is a verb. Hey, vav, hey, it means to exist. But it also means to not exist, or to be annihilated from existence. And this letter Yod as a prefix means he will. So Yahweh at a very simple level means he will cause it to exist. Or he will annihilate it from existing. So we discussed earlier that once you're in motion, you have to have the ability to stop. So Moshe threw down his serpent, it became a crocodile or a snake, It's more like a crocodile. And then it ate the other guy's snakes, and then he pulled it back into his hand as a crocodile again. Caused it to exist, and it stopped. Speaking of Yahweh. We can go about the other three signs that he was given. That's another way to interpret the name. But what I'm saying is, once you know the meanings of the letters, you can go back and look at all these things. Now, we got to take a break. Are we going to talk after the break or no? If you guys want me to go into more details about the names, I will. If you want to look at a particular other scripture, we can do that. It's whatever you guys want. Okay, so think about it, and if anybody has a particular request for looking a little closer, because isn't this like the last? Okay, so you got one more shot at me trying to help you analyze words. But what I want to show you about Deuteronomy 30, since I bumped into Deuteronomy 30 back in like 2004, I guess, is when it really struck me, or 2003, it's been this thing that I've been trying to bring people's attention to. Because if it's us now, then that, remember we draw yesterday, there's this gap, dots, space, when, Eber is to jump over, Pesach means to jump over. What is it? You know, moed, moedim, vechatzi. What is this gap, this separating divide? We just read that it's us teshuva. It's us listening to his voice with heart and soul. If we, and if this week helped, wonderful. But if we turn back to what Yahweh said with all our heart and all our soul, it will cause. It's the catalyst. Going back to Ezekiel 36:23, for him to say, when you make my Shem Hagadol, my great name, my fame, renown, reputation, Kadosh, that's what the Hebrew letters are because they're right out of his mouth. It's not man's doctrine or politics. When you make my Shem Hagadol Kadosh, then I will step in and light that thing up. And the picture of Het Zadi is lighting up. The Zadi is like a log with a flame, or a bird with a wing, or a butterfly crawling out of its cocoon and boop, spreading its wing. Then I will light it up. And the way I translate that is, I will do everything I promised. As I have said, so shall it be. As I have staged, go. Showtime. The event will happen. He's got all the dominoes lined up, and he's just waiting to say, where's the generation of my people? Okay? Everything, Tim has been talking about looking at every word, figuring out when's the timing of the calendar. I'm talking about looking at every word and figure out when's the timing of our behavior. When our behavior lines up, and as a secondary witness, when it happens to correlate to the calendar staging, and it looks like it's both, then Yahweh will just go, boop, and hit that domino. And all history will suddenly fall into place and make sense. It'd be interesting, Rory, to make a Celtic knot pattern out of dominoes. Boom. Drrrr. Speaking of which, there's some stuff on the internet where they make domino things of all kinds of stuff falling. I mean, big, huge, not just little dominoes, all these different colors and on and on and on. But when you see that go, Yahweh has staged history. And remember when Yeshua rose from the dead, walking on the road to Emmaus, he said, oh, didn't you know it had to be like this? What are you talking about? And he rehearsed with them, showing the staging of the dominoes from the beginning all the way through. And then when they saw it, wish somebody had a video camera on that one, right? What did he say? He showed them the way the whole thing had been set up. And when Yeshua did what he did at that crucifixion event, he was just playing into what had already been set up and staged. We are simply playing into what's already been set up and staged. We're not making or inventing anything. We're just, look there's some empty shoes. And after all the generations, nobody ever stepped in. Here, let's just step into them. Thank you, now it's time. Boop. And I think that we're right at that threshold, right at that precipice. And for us to sit here and listen and do is simply saying, okay, Yahweh, it's time. Got your seatbelt on? Yep, okay, here we go. You get on a roller coaster, you better put the seatbelt on. This is a roller coaster. And if you say, well, it's been a roller coaster, yes. Read Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. It's certainly been a roller coaster where Yahweh's done this to us. But there's another verse, I forget where it is. He says, I was furious with my people and I did all this to them. But actually, I was only a little bit mad. It looked like vengeful fury. But he says, when he turns the tables and then dumps it upon our enemies who pursued us, that's the vengeful fury. We ain't seen nothing like what's going to happen to these guys. And they know it. Because they have their druids and shaman and priests to read the Bible. I understood once that, I think it was Bush when he was in office, now this is true or not, but this is what I hear somebody say, that he called in Billy Graham to say, you know the Bible, is this the Battle of Armageddon? Can you tell us, is that where we are? Now why would they do that? Because they don't read it, they don't care, but they know it's true. They believe more. The Canaanites, the people in Jericho, believed more the power and the serious regard of Elohim working for his people than that the Israelites had any sensibility of. We are so lazy, ignorant, stupid. Those are words that Yahweh uses about us. But we don't have to fulfill that heritage. We can be the generation, the people, the very people that turned this world around, shifting it back on its axis to change the calendar or whatever. That's just a geological manifestation. But I'm talking about the statue of Daniel 2 falling, Deuteronomy 30 happening, the blessings of these other chapters. I could show you hundreds of places where all this stuff is validated. But you have to choose whether you believe it and then whether you'll hear and do with all your heart and soul. So now we need to eat lunch with all our heart and soul. And thank you.